Back in the ancient times, when war was won not by a bomb, but by the sword and shield and the valor of fearless warriors. The time when rockets were spears and bullets were arrows fired not by a machine gun, but by the strength and proficiency of archers looming from high walls. Back in those times, some warriors prevailed. Their skill and ferocity granted them a position of greatness that lived on even after their deaths. Their names immortalized in the books of history, never to be erased. In this video, you will learn about 5 of those warriors in a brief manner. Number 5. William Marshall, the greatest knight that has ever lived. A man of loyalty, chivalry, and great ambition. He rose from a poor boy to one of the most famous and powerful men in history. He lived his whole life fighting in tournaments, wars, and battles. His fighting skills granted him wealth and fame across Europe. He is the knight who disarmed Richard the Lionheart and threw him off his horse. But since he was a man of mercy, he spared Lionheart and beheaded his horse instead. On his deathbed, William noted that he had defeated over 500 other knights in one-on-one combat. Number 4. Miyamoto Musashi, an invincible samurai from Japan and probably the greatest swordsman that ever lived. At the age of 12, he defeated a highly trained samurai using a wooden sword. Over his lifetime, Musashi won over 60 duels. However, his total number of enemy kills is much higher. He fought in 6 wars, besting every man he encounters, and all he received was no more than a scratch. Number 3. Marcus Cassius. He is without a doubt the toughest Roman that ever lived. There are many tales about him in which he shows valiance, heroism, and fearlessness. But it was his acts of valor in the Battle of Dyrrhachium that eternalized his name in history. During the battle, Sceva killed so many men that his sword became blunt. But he kept fighting, hacking limbs with his knife and crushing skulls with rocks, until his helmet was destroyed, his shield bristling with arrows, his shoulder stabbed by a javelin, his thigh hit by a sword, and his left eye shot by an arrow. Instead of succumbing to his wounds, Sceva yelled a battle cry, pulled the arrow out of his eye, and resumed the fighting. Number 2. Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia who needs no introduction. It goes without saying that he was the finest general in the history of warfare. Never was he defeated in battle, even when his army was outnumbered. His tactics and strategies made him Alexander the Great, but his leadership and fighting skills made him even greater. He led his own army into battle, giving them morale and driving fear into the hearts of his enemies. Remember what Achilles said to Agamemnon.
Imagine a king who fights his own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight?
And that it was. Alexander leading his cavalry from the front lines and charging them into the enemy formation must have been quite a sight. He died at the age of 33, but even though his life was short, he had conquered more land than most kings could ever hope to conquer during their entire lifetimes. Number 1. Xiahou Dun, the One-Eyed Warrior, a military general in the Han Dynasty, and probably the most fearless warrior the world has ever seen. Throughout his life, he was one hell of a psycho. At the age of 13, he killed a man for insulting his teacher. And the story of how he lost his eye made him a legend and the ultimate badass of China. During one of his battles, he was shot in the eye by an arrow. But what he did afterwards was the most shocking thing any man could ever see. He pulled the arrow out of his eye socket and swallowed his eyeball. The men were terrified, and even the bravest soldier in the enemy lines was scared to death. Following this incident, he was known as Blind Xiahou, the One-Eyed Warrior, and the hearing of his name sent shivers down the spine of his enemies. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe.